Hello, Mrs. Smith's 10th grade English class. Today we are going to talk about copyright. I am your librarian, Miss Roberts. We are going to find out how not to fall into a copyright conundrum. So here's our table of contents today. We're going to be focusing on 4 main subtopics. An overview, where we're going to talk about lesson objectives and the learning target. Next, we're going to define copyright and understand what the purpose of copyright is. We'll discuss the rules of engagement, how to make sure you are not infringing on copyright, and how to use resources that are not copyrighted, or how to get permission to use copyright resources. And then finally, we'll review what we learned about copyright today. So the purpose of this particular presentation is to familiarize you guys with copyright, because you're going to be doing a project for Mrs. Smith, and she wants you to understand exactly what is allowed and what is not allowed when you're looking at resources online or print resources or other things that you may be using in projects and research. So let's start with our overview. Let's talk about what it is that we're trying to learn and how we're going to demonstrate that learning today. So the first objective that we're going to be looking at today is from the AASL Standards Framework for Learners, which is to demonstrate safe, legal, and ethical creating and sharing of knowledge products independently while engaging in a community of practice and an interconnected world. So we're going to do that by following ethical and legal guidelines for gathering and using information, by number 1, responsibly applying information technology and media to learning, and 2, understanding the ethical use of information technology and media. So throughout your high school and hopefully college careers, you'll be learning and using resources to demonstrate your knowledge in different ways, as you have in the past. We want to make sure that you understand what is ethical and legal as far as what you use online and how you go about using it. So your goal today, the learning target, is for you to identify and demonstrate your knowledge of copyright rules by creating a project that shows your understanding. So this presentation that we're talking about right now is going to be the first part of that learning target. We're going to identify. So we need to understand and identify what copyright rules are, and then later with Mrs. Smith, you'll be demonstrating that learning. So let's start at the very beginning. What exactly is copyright? We hear about that all the time, but sometimes we aren't sure of the exact definition. So let's talk about it. Under the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, the legalese or legal definition says to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventor the exclusive right to their respective writings and discovery. So that's what's actually written into the Constitution as the rules for copyright. When it says useful arts and science by securing limited times to authors and inventors, after a certain amount of time, usually it depends on the particular product, but it can be 100 years after the author is deceased, those copyright is no longer applicable. So in other words, they become public domain, which we're also going to talk about in just a moment. So you may have seen online Shakespeare plays or other works of literature that are not copyrighted anymore. So we're going to talk about the difference between those things and things that are still copyrighted. So the legalese definition can be difficult to understand, so let's break it down a little bit more for our purposes. So the bottom line is that copyright protects property, and property can be anything that you own or create. So just like maybe a car is your property, so would be the things that you create. So anything that you create is your property, and anything anybody else created is their property. So online, most everything online is copyrighted. So if somebody writes a blog post, it's copyrighted. It doesn't even have to have a copyright symbol. If it's created by somebody else, it's owned by that other person. So that means that if you want to use that information or art, you have to have permission. So you have to get permission from the creator to be able to use their art or writing or pictures or whatever the case may be. The reason for this is that it protects the creator's work. You wouldn't want somebody just to be able to use your work without permission, and neither would anybody else. So that is the baseline definition. Copyright is there to protect property. So let's talk about the first topic. Online, anything created privately is copyrighted even if it doesn't have a copyright symbol. So here are some examples of that that you may know or not know. Photographs online are copyrighted. There are some exceptions to that, which we'll talk about. Music, videos, book presentations, or other resources, if it's created online by somebody else, then it's their property. So the only way that you could be able to use that property is if you ask permission. So if you didn't create it, you must get permission to use it. This is important. Giving credit is not enough. So I know that we often use scholarly articles or other research, and we cite that research, and that is giving the person credit. With copyright, it's a little different, and we're going to talk about the difference between scholarly articles and research versus creations online, especially artwork, photographs, literature, things like that. There is a difference. So giving credit to use somebody's information or creation is not enough. Protection. The copyright laws allows creators to decide how work is performed, shared, displayed, or copied. And in the next section, we're going to talk about why that copyright exists to protect those creators. So here's a good question. Why does it matter? Well, for our purposes, it matters because it's the law. So if you use something that someone else created without their permission, they can sue you. And you may have heard of instances of this in the media before, where someone used a song without asking permission, or even using the melody of a song without asking permission. Titles, people saying that a book idea was theirs before it was someone else's. So all of these things can cause legal issues if the creator decided to sue. The second reason it matters is because it's just a matter of ethics. You wouldn't want someone else stealing your work without your permission. So just like you wouldn't want someone to do that, you don't want to be someone that does that either. The third reason it matters is because it's protection. So it's protection for the creator for how their work is used. Not only protection against it being used in a way they don't approve of, but also used in a way that would gain money for someone else or cause the creator to lose money from their creation. All right, so we've explained why it matters. Now let's talk about how you can make sure that you're not infringing copyright. So this is really the meat of what we want you to know, so that you can make sure that you're following the rules and doing the right thing when it comes to other people's creations. So we're going to talk about fair use. What is allowed? We're going to talk about plagiarism. How is it different from copyright? And we're also going to talk about public domain, which are open resources that you are allowed to use. They are no longer copyright. So there wouldn't be an infringement if you use those public domain. So let's talk about what copyright infringement is. Copyright infringement is when you use somebody's work without permission. So the creator of a work has the right to determine how the creation is copied, distributed, performed, adapted, used for financial reasons, and used by others. If you don't have permission to do any of these things, you are infringing on the creator's copyright. So if they can prove that you've done any of these things and they decide to sue, they have a legal basis to do so, which is why we want to make sure you understand copyright and what you can't do. So let's talk about what you can do. So there are some exceptions to copyright, and they're called fair use. And this allows you to do some things for certain reasons. And here are some reasons that you can use other people's work. So if you're using, the first one is purpose. So if your purpose is to use a creator's work for education, in most instances, you can use others' work for education as long as you are not using it to entertain. So you may have seen some of your other teachers, or Mrs. Smith even, or me, using creations online to prove a point. Maybe we showed you a video, perhaps you've seen pictures, Because it's used for education, this is allowed. The second fair use is nature. So if you're talking about creative work, artwork, pictures, plays, literature, it's very difficult to be using those things without permission. Factual information, like we talked about with scholarly articles and data and things that are actually published for educational purposes, can often be used as long as they are cited. So that's kind of a difference between creative work and factual and data, is that if you can cite the information in the factual and data information, then they can be used. Another fair use is the amount. So if you see a teacher or you yourself use a small clip of a movie to educate or illustrate a point in a presentation, that is allowed. What is not okay is downloading the whole movie so you can show it to your whole class. And the final fair use has to do with the impact on the market. If you use someone else's work without permission for economic gain, or you keep the creator from economic gain. So let's say somebody wrote a poem online and you print it out and give it to all your friends and start to sell it on eBay. That would not be allowed. This is not fair use. You cannot make money on somebody else's work. All right, so let's talk about the difference between plagiarism and copyright, because this can be a confusing situation for students. We've talked about plagiarism throughout the year in a lot of different instances, and you know that plagiarism can get you into a lot of trouble. It is passing someone else's work off as your own. This is an ethical issue. This is you using somebody else's work and not citing it and not saying where you got it. The consequences are determined by your school or academic institution. So while this is a very serious offense, it is not a basis for a legal issue. Copyright is the basis for a legal issue. It is using someone else's work without permission. The consequences here would be determined by the law. So there is a difference here. Plagiarism, both of these are unethical situations. Plagiarism, though, is an ethical issue of passing somebody's work off as your own, where copyright can be a legal issue. So make sure you are not doing either of these things. Now, the exciting part, there are places where you can get information and sources and resources that are public domain that they are not copyrighted. They're allowed for you to use at will in whatever way you see fit. So there are, like I said, some much older literature that you can use that's not copyrighted. For example, Shakespeare's plays, they are in the open domain, so you can print them off if you want to and use them. Here are some places where you can find information. Project Gutenberg is where you'll find a lot of literature that's in open domain. LibriVox is a really great resource, especially because people have recorded audio versions of books in the public domain. Wikipedia Commons, the Internet Archive. If you're looking for somewhere to get videos for a presentation that is open domain, Unsplash is a good option. There's some others there. Ideas, facts, and data are not protected by copyright law, but you do need to cite if you get that from a different source. Anything created by the U.S. government is open to public domain as well. So here are some great examples and non-examples. You can critique a play. You can copy public domain play for your friends, like I mentioned with Shakespeare. You can parody a song. You can use cited scholarly articles in your research. You can get permission by the creator to use their work. All of those are great examples of ways to make sure that you are staying within the confines of copyright. Here are some non-examples. You can't show a movie to your friends in the park without permission. You can't make copies of textbook pages to give to all your friends to study. You cannot put a song that's copyrighted into a video that you're posting online, and you can't use a published photo that somebody else took online without their permission. So let's review what we learned. Remember, our learning target was students will identify and demonstrate their knowledge of copyright rules. We understood what protects the creator. We understand what fair use is, and we saw some examples and non-examples. So in conclusion, if you ever have any doubt whether you're allowed to use something, first ask permission. Thank you.